In this video, we've compiled the craziest alien theories in Joe Rogan history. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 6. Are aliens testing us? In episode number 2028, Joe had a conversation with ufologist Jeremy Corbell and investigative journalist George Knapp about the possibility of aliens trying to test or challenge us.
What is the explanation of how we acquired these crafts?
Nearly all of the ones that he saw, except for one that had a big hole in the middle of it, all looked intact. It was as if they were dug up at archaeological sites, or there were gifts, like throwing a cell phone into a chimpanzee cage. Here you go, crazy humans, knock yourself out. Let's see how you do with this. That they're just left there for us to find, and as a challenge to us, I guess.
Yeah, I have the same problem as you. Like, I'm like, these motherfuckers not crashing. If they're coming from somewhere else, they're not crashing.
Right.
But people will say to me, look, man, we have airplane problems, and sometimes even planes crash, and maybe there's other circumstances where these things could have crashed because they were hit with some technology. Maybe two of them were dog fighting.
Electrical storms.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That was the Virginia, Brazil story, right?
Yeah.
That was
Right.
an electrical storm.
And so
Also, radar. Some people suspect that really powerful radar can interfere
right,
with
because
them.
some of the radars are also weaponry. That's the thing. Like, you can have energy reception, but also output on some things. So there's some cool devices that actually shoot like high laser weaponry. But my thing is, I don't know if they really crashed. George is kind of edging towards maybe archaeological digs, maybe gifts.
Lazar said that one of them supposedly was from an archaeological dig, right?
Yeah.
Do they know where?
Not that I know of.
He
Does
was,
he know?
No, he was just literally, that's one of the many things that they tried to impose upon him. But remember, they tried to impose a lot of shit on Lazar. He is so succinct with, this is what I know to be real. I had hands on this. Now, they told him a whole bunch of crazy shit. You
Like
know
what?
Dude, just like, I should put that shit out. I'm just crazy. Like,
We
I'm
are
sorry.
we are viewed by the aliens as containers of souls.
I mean, you're not going to tell a guy working on propulsion that. So he was able to sit down for a brief time and go through a document, like a huge briefing document. In there, he saw what they said was a biological biopsy of an alien. Like he didn't care. He was going to the propulsion part. Mm-hmm. But they told him so much wild stuff. He's like, this has to be a joke. But then when he said, he differentiates, he goes, but you can't fake, he said, what I saw. You can't fake your hands trying to get close to the reactor and not being able to touch it. You can't fake something that big lifting like that. So he says, I know for sure what I worked on was not from here. But he goes, everything else they told me, it was words on paper. And I respect that about him. And maybe they wanted him to leak it to John Lear. Remember, he's like friends with this guy, John Lear, who's like already on their radar. The best photo of Area 51 from lake level ever was 1977, the year I was born. John Lear's kicking it out there, stirring up shit at Area 51, taking photos. So he does a whole panoramic of photos of Area 51, sees a truck coming from a distance. Being John Lear, takes the roll, puts it under his ashtray, puts in new film, snaps it again. They confiscate his film. But he had some underneath his cigarette lighter or whatever. And he actually gave those to me. So I got the best shot of Area 51 you'll ever see from lake level was by John Lear. Now, Bob knew John. That's where all the conspiracies come in, because John's like this UFO nut, the godfather of conspiracy. But
How did Bob meet John?
Well, this is your turf. Yeah.
Through a guy named Gene Huff, who was
This is post-exposure,
he met him before he worked out there.
Really?
There was a guy named Gene Huff who did a real estate appraisal for John Lear's house. And Gene was friends with Bob. And Gene and Lear struck up a conversation, brought Bob to meet him. And it was only after that Lazar got hired out there. He would have arguments with Lear about this crazy UFO stuff, because I'd already done a couple of interviews with him in the late 80s.
With Lear,
before I met Lazar. So Lazar was not a believer. He said, I don't believe it. Poor John, he's crazy with this UFO stuff.
So this is fact, and it's so funny, like knowing all these guys, because I wasn't there like he was, but I get to talk with everybody and grill them. I think it was Jim Goodall that was in the car with him. He remembers Bob saying, oh, poor John Lear. And Jim Goodall is like, why? And he's like, because he believes this UFO nonsense. So that was where Lazar was at prior to getting the job out at the test site, is he didn't believe any of this nonsense. In fact, so much so that, remember, I think he told you when he first went in, they had a little decal of an American flag on the saucer, and he thought, oh, those idiots, everybody thought UFOs were from outer space and they're ours, you know?
Right.
And then he quickly realized, wait a second, that, you know, this can't be ours.
It's fascinating to see now that Dave Grush has come forward and give some credence to, we have reverse engineering programs, we have a crash retrieval program, aerospace companies are stashing this stuff in some hangar somewhere. All the stuff that Lazar said as being true, they now say, oh gosh, I guess it is true, but that Lazar, he's still a liar. We don't believe him. You know, you have to kind of do some mental gymnastics to do that.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating when you see these crafts move exactly the way that he described them in 1989.
Yeah.
Straight up.
It's pretty wild because you're seeing footage from, like, what is it, 2014 or something like
the
that?
gimbal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, it moved exactly like he described. Turns on its side, shoots off.
So that's a common thing, is Bob Lazar must be the luckiest con man on planet Earth to get so much shit right over all these years.
What's that? What's the Controlled Disclosure Campaign Plan?
What is this from, Jim?
This is listed at the bottom of that document. They're talking about the NDAA for 2024, and this is the UAP section I've been reading through.
Controlled Disclosure Campaign with respect to unidentified anomalous phenomenon recorded records originated prior to review board termination.
It's this review board. I'm not sure what this is. It talks about all of the, like, they get all of this information, and you better give it to them, is sort of what it says.
They want to set up a review board that would basically declassify stuff that they come across.
Yeah, but I'm being told by people involved that that's not good enough. Like, this is one step, which is to get this presidential review board, and you get a bunch of sociologists and scientists and some Nobel Prize winners, and you look at what can be declassified for the American public in a controlled way. Is like, we need a church-style committee. It's not okay to just have a disclosure panel. You need oversight. And to get that oversight, we need access. The only way that we're going to get that is by forcing where are all the senators in all this? We did this hearing with all these Congress people. Where are all the senators listening to the public being like, okay, I'm going to get after that? They're the only ones with the power to create a church-style committee. Where are the senators right now? And so that's really, this language is so important. I hope people go look it up and they read it, because it's just astonishing when you hear what they're actually doing. And I think it's a good step.
Number 5. Pilot's UFO Encounter. In episode number 1883, Joe interviewed Ryan Graves, a former U.S. Navy pilot who encountered UFOs multiple times while flying a plane.
You have this upgraded radar system, and what are you detecting?
So on the radar, really what we can learn from that is essentially the kinematics of the object. So where is it essentially, and what direction is it going, how fast is it going, things of that nature. We can't necessarily make up the shape or things of that nature. So it's a representation. It's like a block on our screen to show that information. And so when we see that on our radar, we can tell, where it's located, perhaps what's located around it, if there's other objects we're detecting, how fast it's going, what direction it's pointed in, what direction it's traveling in. So we call that velocity vector. So if we see this essentially little circle, it'll have a tail coming off of it. And that tail kind of represents the nose of the vehicle, at least as its flight path is going. And so with that, we would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but more less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would kind of jump around a bit more. They would not proceed in like a perfectly straight line, as you would imagine like a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to kind of be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would kind of be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally. So
winding around, going up, going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not on a flat plane, and they're not going in a straight line.
So I don't want to draw too many firm statements like that, because we would see them being flat too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh gosh, I mean at altitude you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 100, 130, 140 miles an
So
hour.
they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind.
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? Like if you had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now.
Okay.
And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's gonna have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfectly still in winds like that.
Because the wind's not perfectly still either, right?
Exactly.
It changes and varies.
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind. It seems. It just seems like it's just there in a way.
Wow. So the first time you see these things, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. The first time really was, well, what is this, right? It's not a UFO or something mysterious at this point. It's at what we're thinking at this point. We see on the radar is just, well, our radar is broken, right? These perhaps don't represent physical objects yet because we hadn't, visually seen these or seen them on our camera yet. And so, we kind of like, hey, what's going on here? Is anyone else seeing this kind of thing? But not really like investigating it, right? It's just kind of like, all right, there was stuff out there, but maybe next time we'll take a look.
What is the thought? Like, how are you feeling when these, is there an evolution of the thought pattern of how you're addressing these things and thinking about them? Initially, you're thinking they're errors. When do you start getting a thought that, what the fuck is this thing?
Yeah. So that happened when we visually saw one. And the first time we visually saw one, the object was directly at what we call the entry point of the area. So, that box that I told you about in the sky that starts 10 miles off the coast, there's a particular GPS, location and altitude where incoming traffic will fly in and outbound traffic will fly in the exact same spot, but will fly out 1,000 feet lower. There were 2 aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they flew, took off as a flight of 2. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually, you're very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it, and he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature, and he was just sitting there saying, hey, I almost hit one of those damn things. And we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube, and that cube was inside of a clear translucent sphere. And essentially, the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching that inside of that sphere.
And that description mirrors many of the descriptions that people have had of these, whatever you want to call them. Whether they're calling them UAPs now for some strange reason. UFOs, I don't know, does it have a dirty connotation to it? And is it tainted because of so many crazy people talk about UFOs? Is that what it is?
It does come with a lot of assumptions baked
Yeah,
in.
it baked in. So that's something, but whatever it is, that is a design that people have reported seeing before. That this translucent sphere and this cube, can you see through the cube?
Not to my understanding, no.
So it's some sort of solid black cube that's inside this translucent sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just floating around and flying around the sky.
So, that's a good point. Is it floating around? Is it flying around? It's doing both, which is strange, right? Because you could think of that description and go, okay, that's kind of some kind of weird balloon maybe with stuff in it. And that's certainly, one way. If you just view that angle of it, then it seems explainable. But when that, the balloon-like object starts cruising down at, 0.8 Mach, that nullifies that particular idea. And you'll see that a lot, where it's not just like that one picture, that one behavior. It's really, you kind of have to zoom out a bit and look at everything in relation to each other and say, okay, why is this weird? Okay, it was hanging out in a racetrack pattern. That's not exotic. But when you learn it was doing it for, perhaps 13 hours.
13 hours?
Perhaps they were out there all the time, So, I land and I go back. And we weren't on a Intel mission to analyze these, right? We're going to do our training. It's very expensive, $30K an hour to fly these things, right? So really the only time we can put energy into looking at these things is when we're kind of transiting back and forth or waiting for a fight to start. And so, it's never like a dedicated analysis.
Number 4, the Brazil's Roswell incident.
She's frozen in her tracks, locked eyes with this creature, and it's communicating with her. Please help me. He wants help. It's weak, and it's feeble, and it's scared, and it's crouched down. Liliani realizes that Katya is back there. She gets, 100 feet down the path. She leaves her sister, stay here, I'm going back to get Katya. She runs back. And I asked Katya, and I asked all the girls, during that moment of contact, when you lock eyes, I know it's only a brief second, but during that moment of contact, what did you feel? Like, put me there. That's where the title comes from, Moment of Contact, because that was when they locked eyes on this creature. And that's when Katya said, help me, I'm scared. And it was feeble and suffering. And it's a very powerful moment. And these girls have been saying the same thing. The mother, it's the first time I'd ever reported on these so-called like men in dark suits that show up and intimidate witnesses. Honestly, I've been hearing about those cases for so many times, but I've avoided them because it's got so much baggage from men in black. It's just ridiculous. I just didn't even want to be associated with it. But I'd heard it. I can go on until I'm blue in the face. I go till tomorrow morning with the amount of cases, with generals too. But this time, when the mother said that these men showed up and tried to get the daughters to say they were lying and offered her a briefcase full of $100 bills and they could relocate, I don't know, for some reason I said, okay, for the first time in 25 years, I'm going to report on these guys. And I did. And it's in the movie. You can hear the mother talking about it, and she's so emotional. And the mother came back to the location right after it happened. The smell, that stench, and the footprint on the ground. I mean, everybody talks about that stench, that it was so... They said, if you ever take like a skunk, multiply that by like 100,000, that would give you some indication of the level of like how putrid and nasty. It was paralyzing. And it stayed in the areas, like at the hospitals when they did the x-rays, and everybody talks about it. That stench there, it's unbelievable. Like it fills your navel cavities and doesn't leave for a week. It was incredible. And they all said the same thing.
And they couldn't get it out.
They couldn't get it out. Yeah, they sanitized the hospital. The guy said that he had to close off that wing of the hospital while they were sanitizing it because it was so intense. So
How long did it last for?
I heard days and weeks is what I heard from people. And even the mother said when she went to where the creature was, she said that the stench, even there after the creature was gone, got in her nasal cavities, and she tried to flush it out with water and saline or whatever, and she just couldn't get it out of her nasal cavities. Really crazy. But they all did. I mean, everybody talked about that stench, I mean, the military officer, the guy that drove the creature around, I was sitting across from him. You can't see his face, but I did. And I'm looking this guy in the eyes. I'm thinking, I could be looking at a guy that drove a fucking alien around. You have no idea, dude. You have no idea.
How did he describe it?
So fucking intense. When I came back from that trip, people were like, how was your trip to Brazil? What was it like, man? They got great, smoothies and coffee, and I'm just like, you guys have no idea. I think an alien spaceship crashed, and they recovered live aliens, and we made contact, and the Americans came in. That's what I'm thinking about. So I told a couple people. On the last trip I came back, I was just like, I was so rocked. I couldn't reintegrate back into culture. I was just like, fuck, I think this happened. It's the biggest story ever. So people were asking me, Even my neighbor who runs he runs that Make-A-Wish Foundation. He was like, James, he goes, bro, I like you a lot and I got a lot of respect for you, but you lost me on this one. And I was like, I don't blame you, bro. I really don't. But listen to the witnesses. That's all I say. And I would tell people, and I realized I can't talk about it. All I can say is just listen to the witnesses. Don't take it from me. But I'm looking at that guy in the eyes, Joe. And I've been at this for 30 years. I'm working on my 7th film right now. I'm looking this guy in the eyes and I'm like, this guy probably drove an alien around. And it tripped me out so hard. And it ruined his life. He's to get this guy to go on camera, just like a week earlier, he was like, I don't care all the money in the world. I'm never coming forward. The risks are too high.
How did it ruin his life?
Because you're harboring this secret. You're being watched. You're being told not to ever talk about this. And you're looking over your shoulder all the time. And they call you, the military calls you periodically. They want to know where you are. And he's got this secret inside him that he can't tell the rest of the world. And he's thinking about all the different, everyone's out there speculating, is it real, is it fake, is it real, is it fake? And this guy drove a body around. Just think about that for a second. Think about the doctor who took the x-rays of this thing. Marco Leal, thank you, Marco, you're the man. Marco Leal found him 8 years ago. And he was like, he confirmed the story. He was still working at Regional Hospital. He goes, I'll never come forward. Marco kept going every year back and forth. Then he retired. And 4 years after he retired, he agreed to meet with us. He wasn't even sure he was going to go on. And I said, look, man, we'll film you from the back. We'll disguise your voice. Showed us photographs of him at the hospital. We know we've been trying to get at him. Excuse me. At the end of the interview, he said, thank you. I feel so much better. I've been shouldering that burden for 26 years, and I've so desperately wanted to tell somebody, to share that story with the rest of the world. And you meet these people, and you think, why on earth they didn't come to us? They're not trying to sell their story. We tracked them down and begged and pleaded with them to come forward. When I found Martha, the sister of the deceased military officer, Marco Chirizi, we were knocking on doors. I remember the sound guy from Rio de Janeiro. He was like, you're out of your mind, dude. What are you doing? You can't just knock on random doors. I was like, man, if there's a will, there's a way. I'm going to find this lady. And we found her. And it was like this kind of sketchy area. You know, it's like when you get out of your car and you could see like people drawing the curtains back and looking at you and you're standing out like, dude, I stood out like a sore thumb, man. And then we walked up. I had Marco with me, thank God, and we had camera crews and stuff. It's kind of sketchy. And Marta appears, and her husband appears in this he's a big guy, and he's got like a white beater shirt on, and he looks like he wants to rip my fucking head off. And I'm like, and she's looking at me, and he's just looking at her going, Marta's looking at her husband, and her husband's looking at Marta like, give me the signal, I'll kill this guy. That's the fucking... And I was looking at Marco and I was like, James, you need to think quick on your feet right now. And I said immediately, please translate this. I'm here to give your brother justice. I'm here to get the story out. Please talk to me. And we developed a relationship with her slowly over that. And those are the first words that we exchanged. And we eventually got her to come forward and we talked. She'd gone forward in the past, but she doesn't know who the hell I am.
I want to take you back to the doctor.
Okay.
When you talked to the doctor, what did he describe?
He said that it was a normal day, January 1996, it was a regional hospital. He said every day, and all of a sudden, all these military trucks and police cars showed up at the hospital.
In episode number 1828, Joe picked the brain of theoretical physicist Michio Kaku, who discussed the changes that have happened in how we perceive UFOs.
And so the burden of proof has shifted. It used to be the burden of proof was on the people who believed in UFOs. They saw something, prove it. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the Pentagon, to the military. Now they have to prove that these aren't extraterrestrial. And so I think there's been a sea change in the last just several years. 50 years ago, there was a congressional hearing, and it was coming out of Project Blue Book. And there was a lot of laughter and a lot of jokes about little green men in outer space. 50 years ago, that's the way it was. Now, things have changed. Now people are looking at are they a threat militarily? What kinds of sensors do we have? What kind of metrics do we have? We now have frame by frame an analysis of these objects. These objects travel between Mach 5 and Mach 20. That's 20 times the speed of sound. These objects can zigzag, and we can measure the g-force inside this object. The g-forces are several hundred times the force of gravity. In other words, any living person's bones would be crushed by these objects, so they're probably drones of some sort. These objects can drop 70,000 feet in a few seconds. Think about that. It can drop a tremendous distance in just a few seconds, and they can go underwater. This is something that we didn't realize before, but yes, they can actually go underwater. And they also move without creating an exhaust or breaking the sound barrier. So these are things that we can now document frame by frame looking at these videotapes.
So for yourself, what was the shift? And how did you feel about UFOs, say like 10, 15 years ago?
Well, there is this giggle factor, and it's the third rail, of course, of your scientific reputation, if you believe in these things. But the evidence is accumulating over the last several years. Now, when I was first approached by Carolyn Corey, the producer of this film, A Tear in the Sky, I was skeptical. I said to myself, come on. I mean, 5 days? 5 days you're going to look for flying saucers in the sky? What happens if the aliens are camera shy and they don't show up in 5 days? So I was pleasantly surprised when they actually found something. They actually have photographic evidence of objects that can gyrate just the way the Pentagon has said. And so we now have a sea change. A center of gravity has changed with regards to looking at these objects. We no longer simply look at one individual seeing something in the sky. No, we demand hours of videotape, multiple sightings by multiple modes. That's the gold standard now.
So what do you think is happening? Do you think that this is something that maybe another government from another country has created that far surpasses our abilities, or do you think that this is coming from somewhere else?
Well, the Pentagon has listed, I think, 5 different options. One option, of course, is that they're weather balloons or something that's an artifact of our space program. Maybe a piece of rocket that is plunging back into the Earth's atmosphere. That's one category. Another category is anomalous weather events. They happen, and they have to be looked at very carefully. But the last option is other. That is not just the Russians or the Chinese, because these objects apparently can gyrate faster than what the Chinese and the Russians can muster, but it opened the door to the possibility of other. They didn't specify what other was, but you can fill in the dots yourself. Now, one possibility for other is hypersonic drones. We see that in warfare now. The Russians, in the Battle of Ukraine, is actually using hypersonic drones to hit targets inside Ukraine. To be hypersonic, you have to go faster than Mach 5. Anything faster than 5 times the speed of sound is called hypersonic. And so the Russians are now fielding hypersonic drones in warfare. But you see, this is something just in the last few months. These sightings, they go back decades into the past, with objects executing these gyrations decades ago. And that's why you have to take them seriously.
So the Commander David Fravor event that we talked about off the Nimitz, that was 2004. Do we have an accurate understanding about military capability in terms of like drones and propulsion systems from 2004? Or are there things that are classified that we are not going to have access to? Like, is it possible that, 18 years ago, they had the capability to have a vehicle or a drone move this way, that just that information has just not been released?
Well, 2 years ago, the United States military admitted that it stopped working on these hypersonic drones. Why? They're unstable. They zigzag. And that's why the Russians have put a premium on this technology to evade our Star Wars program. The Russians wanted a rocket that can maneuver and therefore outwit a stationary Star Wars system designed to shoot down these drones.
Right.
So that's why the Russians have put a priority on this, and they've now fielding it in warfare. We actually see them as a military weapon. 2 years ago, the United States military stopped its program. They're too unstable. They were not reliable, and it was not worth the amount of money to put into it, because the military was invested in the Star Wars program, not the anti-Star Wars program. But because Vladimir Putin announced the hypersonic drones, then the United States military said, oops, nope, we have to get into the game too. So now the United States is also working on hypersonic drones, as well as the Chinese. So the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans are all working on these things. But you can see how primitive they are. We're talking about objects that defy the known laws of aerodynamics with a technology beyond what we have today. And so that's why people are scratching their heads. Whose are these things if they're not the Chinese, the Russians, or the United States?
So one of the main points of contention is the lack of visible propulsion method, right? There's no, essentially, there's no heat signature. There's nothing that we understand to be present that normally exists when something is going at a tremendous rate of speed.
That's right. Not only that, these objects create no sonic booms. When you exceed the sound barrier, you create a gigantic boom that is then shatters windows and can be heard miles around. These objects can effortlessly break the sound barrier and not create a sonic boom. And they don't create any exhaust. We don't see any exhaust trail from these objects. So either they're an optical illusion of some sort, or they have a set of laws of physics beyond what we can muster.
Number 2, alien abduction. In episode number 1597, Joe and Travis Walton delved into Walton's experiences with alien abduction.
The parts that weren't glowing, it wasn't so hard, bright that you couldn't look at it. But it had a metallic look to it.
So what did the craft itself look like?
It was a classic disc-shaped craft. Years later, there was a report. I can never remember names, but this guy was saying that he worked at Area 51, and they had something in there. He worked with the Tester Model Corporation to create a model of what he was describing, and that's actually the closest of any of the other descriptions I've seen. But I don't think these things have just one type of craft. I think there's many, many different shapes.
What makes you think that?
Well, personal experience. I try not to emphasize these other incidents, but I've seen the glowing sphere. I've seen the giant black triangle. Other craft that were a ball of light that you couldn't penetrate the light with your eyes, but
Now this is after this experience.
I think the reason my brother Dwayne was persuaded more quickly than my brother Don was that he saw a craft in those woods. That's probably 10 miles from there while deer hunting. And it was kind of tic-tac shaped, and that's something that's been observed by, in military reports recently.
Yeah. So you see this thing, this disc-shaped craft,
Yeah.
and then what happens?
It started to move and started to get louder.
Louder.
Yeah. It was, the guys in the truck heard it too. There was a low thunder, is kind of a rumble that you actually sort of felt more than heard. And then there were other high-pitched frequencies. I was talking to a group of students from
technical college, and they were really interested in what the sound was like to try to, compare that with the theories that they had concerning what might be their propulsion. But the increase in volume, it suddenly got louder as it started to move. And, at the same time, the guys in the truck were screaming, "Get away from there, let's go, get back in the truck, let's go." And, which would have been the smart thing to do. But as soon as it moved, it startled me, and I just ducked for cover. There was a log there. I got down behind this log, and they were screaming, "Let's go, let's go, let's go." And I didn't need to be told. I was just going to, stand up and run away. But see, when I jumped for cover, I went down and forward to reach where the log would hide me. And that brought me closer to it. So when I stood up, at that point, that was the closest I was to the object.
How close?
It was still like 8 or 10 feet away, from the surface of it. But that was when the energy discharge happened. I've worked on a number of theories about what might have happened. At the time, some of the other guys on the truck were thinking, immediately Steve said, "It got him." Like, if you shot a deer, you got it,
Right.
And so it might not have been as we assumed at first, that it was some kind of stun gun or something, but maybe just closing that gap allowed this energy to leap to ground through me. And
like static electricity or something.
yeah, one thing that really weighs heavy in that direction is that when I found years later that they have satellites or something that record the number of lightning strikes, and that area has the highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States, except for the Everglades. The Everglades has a bit more, but that's over water. So that adds to another theory. What were they doing there?
So that area that has a high level of lightning strikes, do you think it makes sense that they're observing that, or is that why they were there? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, up until a few years ago, you walk down the rim road, and if you see a tree that's been hit by lightning, you can always see it. It's a strip of bark that's just blasted out of there, and it's all bare, and it can actually still survive the lightning strike, but it turns the sap to steam instantly, and it just explodes out the side of the tree, blows the bark off. But I was at a conference where this lady was. I said, "What's this?" And she says, "That's fulgurite." I said, "What's that?" And she says, "That's when lightning strikes the earth. You've got millions of volts, millions of degrees that form these crystals that aren't formed geologically." So I kind of leaned towards this theory that perhaps they were looking for fulgurite, for a very unique kind of crystal that would be formed by that kind of blast of energy. I'd never heard of fulgurite before.
Can you pull up an image of that, Jamie? I'd like to see what that looks like. I know tritonite is something that happens when they call it nuclear glass. It happens when there is either a nuclear explosion or when asteroid impacts hit the Earth. That's it right there.
Well, these crystals are supposed to have very special properties for people who are into crystal stuff, but
what does that say there, Jamie? This is what happens. That's what can. Wow, that's wild.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. That's pretty wild. So it might be that they were looking for that. Well, who knows? Maybe it's something that they use for energy. What is that? That's really when lightning struck Santa created that thing? That's wild. That is wild. Look at that. It looks like a tree coming out of the sand.
I'm guessing that was wet sand.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, it's right next to the beach. It must be wet. That is crazy.
Number 1. Zimbabwe UFO Encounter. In episode number 1574, Joe had a discussion with alien documentary director James Fox and respected UFOologist Jacques Vallée about a UFO landing in Zimbabwe.
I was doing my first documentary back in 1997 when I was just naive enough to think I can get an interview with Steven Spielberg. We had a mutual friend involved, this woman Janet, and she gets back to me and she's like, yeah, so Spielberg's definitely not going to meet with you, but he knows you're working on this UFO documentary. He thinks you should look into this landing case that happened in Africa at the school. And I said to myself at the time, and remind you guys that I was making a film on UFOs, and I dismissed it so quickly because I thought, there's no way that a mass landing with the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony at a school in broad daylight could happen and the whole world not know about it. So I just walked away from that story for about 10 years. 10 years later, I'm doing an event at the National Press Club with Leslie Kean, who was part of the article in the New York Times that came out in 2017. And she introduced me to this guy, Randall Nickerson. And she's like, oh, he's working on this landing case in Africa. Long story short, he's working on a film now. I think it's coming out next year, specifically on just that case. Dan Farah is producing it. And he said, I'm working on the case, and if you want to do something with me on it, a small piece, I could. So I got back into it. I licensed some of the footage that Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist that came and interviewed the school children on camera within a week of it happening. He unfortunately looked the wrong way in London, got run down by a car and died. So I contacted the Institute with the help of Randall Nickerson. I licensed the archival footage. We tracked down the witnesses today. We flew them in from all different corners of the world, brought them together. A lot of them were standing right next to each other. They came face to face, and one of the things I've realized was that there were roughly 100 kids in the playground, broad daylight, aerial school, Rua, Zimbabwe, 1994, and they got within arms, some of them within arm's length of these beings, and brought these witnesses together for the first time in 20 years. And a lot of them hadn't even told their significant others, just because they said they were tired of having to defend this. And I myself didn't believe it when I first heard about it back in 1997. And that segment of the film is the most, in my opinion, is the most powerful segment, because
It's very compelling.
you've got all these children saying what they saw on camera after it happened, and then you see them 20 years later, and then we go to Africa and we meet with the headmistress, or she was a teacher at the time. We meet with other witnesses. We go to the landing site. We talk to people at the school. That case is absolutely, and it was witnessed by lots of other people in and around the area for several days before it chose a school to land.
It's so compelling because the children are all clearly, they're not actors. So as they're adults later, they're all talking about this moment, and it's like they had a religious experience together. Like they're all sharing it and talking about it, and you could tell it's like it's a deeply moving experience. If they were actors, they wouldn't have been able to do such a good job, because to convey the reality of that moment to them, to be able to have this interpretation of this event where they're all consistent in the story and they're all clearly still shook by this moment. It's really interesting, because if you had that scene in a movie, it would take like a really good actor to pull it off. And they'd probably need multiple takes. They'd probably want to get the best one. But those kids, the way they were talking about it and the way they were drawing it, you're like, wow, it really does seem like something happened to them.
I know how credible that the testimony of the children is, because my partner Rebecca, she's never had much of an interest in what I do, making documentaries on UFOs. I do other things as well, but when I was reviewing in the studio the archival interview of the children, she just dropped off a cup of coffee and she stopped and went, oh my God, those children are not lying. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Because look, I ask your audience to don't take it from me. Just suspend judgment for a moment and imagine, hypothetically, if a UFO or several UFOs landed at a school in broad daylight in Rua, Zimbabwe, Africa, and interacted telepathically with nearly 100 school children. Not all of them had telepathic, but seeing the incident, How significant of a story would you give that?
Well, not only that, they had the same message.
Yes.
But the
Yes.
telepathic message was that technology is a real problem.
Yes.
And there's things that people are doing with technology that are going to ruin the earth.
Yes.
And they were trying to relay this to children, which is very strange.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, maybe they just thought they were adults because they were the same size as the aliens. I mean, do you think they knew that they were children? Do you think they understood that it was a school? I mean, this is all speculation,
Yeah.
right?
But no, I definitely had to ask myself, look, during the production of the film, Paula Harris actually turned me on to another landing case that happened in Australia in 1966 at a school. And this time there were roughly 300 witnesses that saw a disc land right outside a playground in Australia. And we went to Australia and investigated that case, went to the landing site, talked to eyewitness testimony, people that jumped the fence at the school playground and ran over to where this thing landed. And then we even interviewed a guy who snapped a photograph of a disc, a Polaroid, back in 1966, 2 days prior to the incident. So it's very probably that we have photographic evidence, we have eyewitness testimony, and for the first time we've got testimony from a science teacher. So why do these things land at schools? It seems like, and I'm just totally speculating here, but it seems like if I were going to do that, it seems like a pretty benign environment. We've had testimony from military guys that we take a fairly hostile position towards things that penetrate sensitive military installations. And, so maybe, I'm just saying maybe
It's safe.
Maybe it's safe.
Maybe
yeah,
it's
but we
safe
have to
and-
stop reacting to intrusions by UFOs as a threat. I mean, that's the whole thing behind this new task force. And as much as I respect, the task force, my colleagues and I want to cooperate with them to the extent that we can bring information or resources to what they do. But there is more. This should not be looked at specifically as a threat. I mean, with the phenomena that we observe, I mean, if they wanted to blow up those F-18s, they could do it, okay? Obviously, that's not what it's all about. And this idea of just labeling it all as a threat because it's unknown, that's a wrong idea. 90% of the information comes from the public, comes from children, and very, very little of it is made up. In France, I mean, the data we get, at the French Space Agency comes through channels where if people reported something that's found to be untrue, they're going to be called by the police.
Depending on the quest and topic, sometimes Joe's interviews can get incredibly heated. So click now to see the most heated arguments in Joe Rogan history.